Heartless daughter-in-law humiliates elderly mother-in-law and forces her to eat dog food while her husband is away on a business trip. Cynthia was always the kind of woman who went unnoticed in corners, not for lack of presence, but because of how much she gave of herself. She was discreet in her gestures, measured in her words, and tireless in her work. Her hands were rarely still. If they weren't washing, they were cooking, sewing, cleaning, or helping someone. From a very young age, she adopted as a life rule the care of others. She always put everyone else before herself, as if her own needs were a dispensable detail. Even after the early loss of her husband, there was no public crying, no complaining. She gathered her pain silently and moved on. She raised her 2 children with whatever she had, often with what she lacked. She faced difficulties with dignity and never let her suffering overflow. Her youngest daughter, Kimberly, was always by her mother's side, not just physically, but out of genuine affection. Kimberly was the type who could see tiredness in a look, who hugged without reason, who offered presence naturally. Her eldest son, Paul, took a different path. He grew up reserved, distant, a boy who learned fast and spoke little. He was methodical, efficient, and careful only with what he considered relevant. Over time, the affection he received from his mother turned into a set of obligations he fulfilled exactly, but without involvement. Cynthia never demanded anything, never had. She wasn't the type to expect thanks or repayment. But over time, she learned to be satisfied with crumbs of attention. A quick phone call, a visit scheduled in advance, a memory on special dates. That was how she filled the void. Years passed, as they always do, and the children went on with their lives. Kimberly built hers quietly, preferring the simplicity of routine and the comfort of being close to her mother. She made a point of keeping their bond tight, whether through an unexpected visit or a silent helping hand with daily tasks. Paul, on the other hand, slowly drifted away. First came school, then work, and before he realized it, he was living far away. Visits became sporadic events, almost ceremonial, reserved for holidays or emergencies. Cynthia, as always, did not protest. When Paul announced his marriage to Isabella, Cynthia welcomed him with open arms. She hugged her daughter-in-law with the same tenderness she always offered. She tried, with gentle gestures and light conversations, to build a bond with her. But Isabella seemed surrounded by an invisible barrier. She was polite, always had been. She followed social rituals with precision, but did not allow any real closeness. Her gaze was neutral, her words formal, her gestures restrained. Even without direct insults, Cynthia felt the weight of hidden contempt in the small details. Gradually, she realized she was only tolerated, not welcomed, just endured. She understood, without anyone saying it, that her role was to be present without being noticed. The invisible figure in the corner of the room, the silent presence that doesn't bother, doesn't demand, doesn't take up space. And as she always did, she accepted it. Not out of resignation, but out of a kind of love that only exists if it is quiet. Over time, Cynthia's body began to fail subtly, as everything in her always had. First came the fatigue that didn't go away even with rest. Then dizziness, small forgetfulness, knee pains that hadn't existed before. Even getting out of bed started to take more time, more patience. The house where she lived seemed increasingly full of invisible obstacles. The steps, the old stove, the absence of voices. The doctor, in a routine appointment pushed by Kimberly's insistence, was direct. He said Cynthia needed constant supervision, that it would be better to be close to someone every day, that living alone at that point was no longer a safe choice. Kimberly immediately offered her home, but Cynthia hesitated. She knew her daughter had little space and a lot of work. It was Paul who suggested, in a practical tone, like someone fulfilling a protocol. "She can spend some time at our place. We'll take turns." Kimberly wanted to argue but held back. Cynthia silently nodded calmly. The move was done quietly. Few boxes, almost no furniture. Cynthia arrived at her son's house with the same lightness with which she had always tried to exist. Isabella opened the door with a short smile, almost a reflex. She only said, "Welcome." The tone was lukewarm, neutral, and there was no hug. Cynthia entered, looking around as if measuring the space between the furniture and tolerance. Paul took the suitcases to the back room and said, "Make yourself at home, Mom. If you need anything, let me know." Then he left to take a work call. Isabella stayed there, standing still. Cynthia, with a discreet smile, said, "I'll try not to bother." The first days were marked by a forced routine of politeness. Isabella offered ready coffee, but didn't expect Cynthia to join her. She said, "It's in the thermos, help yourself," and returned to her phone. At lunch, she served small portions and asked without looking into her eyes, "Is this okay, Mrs. Cynthia?" The elderly woman always replied with the same phrase, "Yes, it's great. Thank you, dear." Isabella smiled lightly, closed her mouth, left the kitchen. Paul, when present, kept a careful but detached posture. He asked about medicine if she needed anything and played the role of son with the precision of someone following a to-do list. Cynthia, in her contained essence, tried to be an invisible guest. She woke up early, washed her own dishes, swept the kitchen, folded clothes left on the sofa. She avoided spending too much time in the living room, used the TV sparingly, spoke even less. When she received a look from Isabella, she responded with a kind gesture. When her daughter-in-law stopped including her name in conversations, she didn't interrupt. She ate slowly, silently, and went to her room soon after meals. For her, not bothering was a form of resistance, but the atmosphere that was once only indifferent began to change. The first time Paul had to travel for work, Cynthia didn't find it strange. He warned days in advance, explaining it would be quick. "Only 2 days, Mom. Isabella will be here. If you need anything, just call." Cynthia smiled and said, "Go easy, son. I'll manage." Paul gave her a brief hug, grabbed his suitcase and left quickly. As soon as the sound of the door faded, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavier, and Isabella's presence took on another tone. That night, dinner was watery soup and a piece of hard bread. Cynthia thanked her as always. "It was great, Isabella. Thank you very much." But her daughter-in-law did not respond. The next day, Cynthia woke and went to the kitchen. The refrigerator was locked with a small padlock. On the table, only a mug of black coffee and a handwritten note. "For you." She drank the cold coffee and returned to her room. During the day, the television stayed off. When she tried to turn it on, she noticed the remote control was missing. She searched everywhere, unsuccessfully. At night, she knocked softly on Isabella's door and said, "Did you see the living room remote, dear?" Isabella replied without opening the door, "It must be around. I haven't looked for it." Cynthia did not insist. On Paul's second trip, there was no coffee. The fridge remained locked, and there was only a stale slice of bread on the table. Isabella passed by her and said, "It'll be like this today, I'm busy." Cynthia just nodded. She didn't have the strength to argue. She washed her own clothes in the sink, even with arm pain. She started going to bed earlier, drinking more water to fool her hunger. With each new trip, the situation worsened. One Sunday, while Isabella watched TV, Cynthia asked, "Do you need help with anything around the house?" Isabella glanced sideways and said, "No, thanks. Just try not to make a mess." Then she went back to the sofa. Cynthia stayed silent. By the end of that week, the food served was always the same. Reheated leftovers, small cold portions, sometimes only a glass of milk with a cookie. Cynthia began hiding small pieces of bread in her room, trying to save something for the following days. Kimberly appeared whenever she could. She stopped by to see her mother, brought fruit, chatted on the porch, watched carefully. "Are you okay, Mom? You look tired," she said worriedly. Cynthia smiled and replied, "Everything's fine, my daughter. The house is calm and Isabella has been kind." But sometimes, even with a smile on her face, her eyes said otherwise. Kimberly noticed but respected the silence, still uncertain about what was really happening. Paul called at night but spoke more with Isabella. When he asked about his mother, his wife said, "She's fine, calm, she hardly causes any trouble." Cynthia listened in the background and kept smiling. When he asked to talk to her, she picked up the phone and said, "Hi, son. Everything's fine here. Take care." He answered quickly and hung up, saying he needed to rest. Cynthia didn't want to bother him. On the fourth trip, the worst of all, everything collapsed. It was a cloudy morning. Cynthia woke up with a rumbling stomach. She went to the kitchen and found only a plastic container on the table. Inside, dog food. Next to it, a spoon. Isabella stood leaning on the counter, looking directly at her. Cynthia froze. Isabella said in the coldest tone she had ever used, "Either this or nothing. If you want to complain, call your son." Cynthia lowered her eyes. Her body trembled. The smell of the dog food was strong, dry, metallic, but the hunger was stronger. She sat down slowly, picked up the spoon. The silence in the room was louder than any scream. She ate. The taste was horrible, dry and bitter, but worse was what it represented. It wasn't just about hunger, it was about abandonment, about not existing for anyone, about knowing that if she died there, maybe no one would notice. When she finished, she got up from the table without looking at Isabella. She went to the bedroom, rinsed her mouth with water and lay down. She cried silently, as she always did. In the following days, Cynthia said nothing more. She did the basics, drank water, took her medication in secret, and waited. Kimberly still came by, bringing fresh bread, preparing coffee with care. She watched her mother's face more closely. "Are you really okay, Mom? Is there anything I can do?" Cynthia replied in the same gentle tone. "Don't worry, my daughter. I'm used to it. I just need a little peace." Kimberly hesitated, but respected her. She still didn't see everything. When Paul returned, she greeted him with a light hug. He asked, "Is everything okay here, Mom?" Cynthia answered, "Yes, son, everything's fine," and smiled. Isabella next to him said, "Everything went smoothly. We understand each other." Paul nodded and went to put away his suitcase. Cynthia knew she could have told him, but she didn't want to. In her mind, protecting the family was still more important than exposing a wound. She thought revealing it would destroy whatever bond was left between them. She preferred to believe enduring it was better than causing a rupture. And so, she decided to remain silent. Kimberly, despite respecting her mother's space, felt something was wrong. The visits became more frequent but always short, always met with the same answer. "Everything's fine, my daughter." Yet Cynthia's eyes did not lie. They had a new tiredness, a deeper sadness, and even when she smiled, the smile didn't reach her eyes. Kimberly started calling every day, trying to feel from her mother's tone if there was something left unsaid. But the conversations grew shorter, with long pauses, hesitations that hadn't been there before. "Everything's fine here, my daughter. I'll call you later, okay?" Cynthia always said, with a kind but increasingly distant tone. Until one ordinary afternoon, Kimberly decided she wouldn't wait any longer. Something inside her tightened in an uncomfortable way, like an intuition shouting when the mind tries to silence it. She grabbed her purse, told no one, and went to her brother's house. She knew when he was usually away and didn't care. She arrived without knocking. The door, as usual, was unlocked. She entered, and the silence in the air said more than any word. There was no sound of TV, no voices, no footsteps. She passed through the living room slowly, looking around. Nothing seemed out of place, but everything felt wrong. As she approached the kitchen, she heard the soft sound of a spoon scraping a plastic container. She paused for a moment, then she entered. What she saw made her freeze. Her mother was sitting at the table, bent over, with trembling hands holding a container of dog food. She ate slowly, not looking around, as if disconnected from her own body. On the other side of the kitchen, Isabella stood with crossed arms, watching the scene with complete disdain. Kimberly couldn't believe what she was seeing. Blood rushed to her head in an instant. "But what is going on here?" Kimberly said, standing at the kitchen door, unable to believe what she saw. Cynthia, seated at the table, didn't answer. She was bent over, still holding a trembling spoon, about to lift it to her mouth again. The wet dog food inside the plastic container gave off a strong smell. Cynthia's face was pale, her eyes downcast, as if shame had glued her soul to the floor. Kimberly stepped forward, one step, then another, and then her voice broke. "Mom, what is this? Why are you eating this?" Cynthia tried to explain, but the words got stuck in her throat. She just shook her head, eyes full of tears. Isabella, leaning against the counter, answered first. "It's all we had. She said she was hungry, and I put out what I found." Kimberly slowly turned toward her sister-in-law. "Dog food? You put dog food out for her?" "She didn't complain," said Isabella, trying to keep her composure. "She just said she was hungry. I offered what was there." Kimberly looked again at her mother. "Mom, this isn't food. This is cruelty. Why didn't you tell me before?" Cynthia shook her head slowly, struggling. "I thought it wouldn't happen again. I thought it was just once." Kimberly stepped closer. She knelt beside her mother, took her hands, and looked firmly into her eyes. "How long have you been eating this?" "Only sometimes, when she doesn't leave anything. I didn't want trouble." Isabella crossed her arms. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I'm not anyone's maid. Living with her isn't easy, and I'm tired of pretending it is." Kimberly stood slowly, blood boiling, but voice still low. "You gave dog food to my mother and want to tell me this is tiredness? She's always playing the victim, but never helps with anything. She's an elderly woman, my mother, and you gave her dog food. That's unforgivable." "You're twisting everything, as usual, always wanting to be the savior, the perfect daughter. And you? Torturing silently and then playing the victim? You don't know what it's like living with her every day. She doesn't talk, doesn't react. It's like she doesn't even feel. I just did what I could." Cynthia interrupted in a trembling voice. "Kimberly, please, just get me out of here." Kimberly closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath. When she opened them, she was determined. She grabbed her phone from her purse, turned to Isabella and said with cutting calm, "You're going to call Paul. Now. Tell him you need to come back. No lies, or I'll call him myself, and he'll come with the police." Isabella hesitated, but saw she had no choice. She took the phone, dialed with trembling hands. "Hi, love, can you come home? There's a problem here. No, it's not serious, but you better come, now." Kimberly approached, snatched the phone from her hand firmly. "Paul, it's me. Mom is being mistreated here. She's eating dog food, Paul. Dog food. Come back now. If you take too long, I'm going straight to the police." On the other end, silence. Then a dry reply. "I'm coming." Kimberly hung up and dropped the phone on the table. She went back to Cynthia, helped her up, gently wiped her face. "Mom, from now on, no one will treat you like this anymore. Never again." Cynthia just nodded, eyes red but relief beginning to grow deep inside her chest. When Paul arrived less than an hour later, he entered the house without saying a word. The door slammed shut behind him. Kimberly waited in the living room. "What happened?" he asked, looking around. "Look at her," Kimberly said, pointing to their mother, sitting on the sofa with a thin blanket over her shoulders. Look closely, Paul. Then ask your wife what she's been serving for lunch. Paul turned to Isabella, who stood with crossed arms, unable to hold his gaze. Isabella? She tried to control her voice. Paul, your sister is twisting everything. Your mother said she was hungry, and I just put out what I had at the time. That's all. There was nothing else ready. And what was it, dog food? She ate it without complaining, didn't seem to care. Paul stood still, looking at both women, unsure what to do. Is this really serious? Ask our mother, Kimberly said. Paul approached Cynthia, who lowered her eyes. Mom, is this true? It took a few seconds. Cynthia then nodded. Yes. Paul recoiled as if slapped in the face. He sat down, hands trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were never here. And when you were, it was too fast. I thought I could bear it, just a little longer. Kimberly spoke, now with contained anger. She thought protecting you was more important than protecting herself. Paul didn't answer. He stood up slowly. She's coming with you today, now, and then we'll see what to do. Isabella stepped forward. Paul, please. He raised his hand without looking at her. Don't talk to me. Not now. That night, as Kimberly packed her mother's clothes into a small suitcase, Paul helped silently. No words were spoken until they left. Cynthia crossed the threshold with slow steps, not looking back. But deep down, something inside her rose for the first time in a long time. The certainty that this was no longer the end. It was a new beginning. After leaving their mother under Kimberly's care, Paul returned home quietly. Upon entering, he found Isabella waiting on the sofa, papers in hand and rehearsed excuses on her lips. She didn't waste time. I took care of her alone, Paul, Isabella said, her exhausted tone trying to sound like proof of effort. You don't know what it's like. She didn't talk, didn't react. I did everything. Everything. Paul, sitting at the table where his mother had been humiliated, didn't reply immediately. He just stared at the wood surface, as if the memory was still there, staining it. You gave dog food to her, Isabella. I just can't understand that, he finally said. I was exhausted. Living with her was hard. She stayed still all day, didn't help with anything. It was like living with a ghost. Isabella retorted, her voice rising a little more. Paul looked up, now firm. She was my mother. You weren't obliged to love her, but you were obliged to respect her, and you didn't do that. Isabella sighed, dropping the papers on the table. I just wanted some peace, some help. I never had support. You were always traveling, disappearing. I was alone in that house. Paul stood up. And you thought you could take it out on her, make my mother the target of your frustration. I was wrong, Isabella said almost in a whisper, but I'm not a monster. Paul didn't say she was, but he didn't say she wasn't either. He turned and went upstairs, leaving the house plunged in uncomfortable silence. In the following days, she didn't keep quiet. She repeated her version to anyone who wanted to hear. She said she was exhausted. Her mother-in-law was difficult. The living situation had become unbearable. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, an isolated episode out of context. She tried to soften, relativize, reformulate, but there was nowhere left to hide what had really happened. Days later, the formal complaint was filed by Kimberly with legal support from a local NGO. Justice finally began its course. But inside Cynthia, something even more important began: hope. As the process moved forward, Cynthia underwent detailed clinical evaluations. The exams showed what the eyes could no longer hide. There were physical signs of neglect, but the deepest wounds were inside. She had a constant fear of making mistakes, avoided talking too much, and her withdrawn posture revealed a life of swallowed silence. A psychologist started seeing her weekly. At first, Cynthia spoke little. She nodded, looked away, But over time she opened up, letting out words she had held in her chest for years. She spoke of fear, of shame, of feeling like a burden, of hunger that hurt more in the soul than in the stomach. At Kimberly's house, she found something she no longer remembered how to feel: comfort. Nothing grand, but everything true. Mornings began to smell like coffee and sound like familiar footsteps. Kimberly included her in everything, from preparing lunch to choosing what to watch on TV. The daughter made a point of saying, "This house is yours too, Mom," and Cynthia began to believe. Paul started visiting more often. He came with fruit, blankets, books. He didn't say he felt guilty, but his gestures spoke. One Sunday, he showed up with a flower from the garden of the old house and said, "This one was from the kitchen corner. You always liked it." Cynthia smiled shyly. "I still do." Isabella tried appealing to justice. She said it was all an exaggeration, that she was an overworked, misunderstood woman. But the reports were clear, the testimonies coherent. The judge, in a quick hearing, issued the sentence, elder abuse. Isabella was sentenced to community service as an alternative penalty. She lost all marital rights. She was legally removed from the house and, over time, from Paul's life as well. She moved far away, head down, but pride intact. She did not accept blame. She told those few who still listened that it was all hysteria from a divided family. But no one listened anymore. Even old acquaintances preferred to avoid her name. The loneliness she caused now surrounded her, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was like before. Weeks later, Paul renovated his mother's room at his house. He painted the walls, replaced the furniture, bought a recliner. "If you ever want to come back, everything will be just right," he said. Cynthia thanked him, but didn't return, because where she was, there was affection, and that was more important than space. Cynthia, supported emotionally and by professionals recommended by the NGO, gained strength. Little by little, she began doing things that once seemed forgotten. One day, Kimberly found her wearing an apron, chopping vegetables precisely. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Rice with carrots and chicken, the way you liked it when you were a little girl," Cynthia replied with a slight smile. She started caring for the plants again, watering the pots delicately, cleaning each leaf one by one. She joined conversation groups for elderly women. She told her story calmly, firmly. "It's not to shock, it's to warn," she said. And other women listening to her began to speak too. Her pain made room for other pains to stop being invisible. Some nights still brought nightmares, the image of the dog food container, the sound of locked doors. But Kimberly was always nearby, and when Cynthia woke up startled, there was a hand to hold, a gentle voice to say, "You're safe now." Paul kept coming. He tended the garden, brought cakes and magazines. Sometimes he sat next to his mother and said, "I'm trying, okay?" Cynthia responded with a lighter look every day. Kimberly's house flourished, not because of decoration, but because of the energy. It was a place where every corner breathed care. Cynthia found her essence there again. She cooked, laughed, made simple plans. She sat at the table no longer with fear or shame, but with dignity. The woman who was once invisible, who silenced her own pain for love of her children, was now heard, consulted, part of things. And her story, which began silently, became a warning for those who still think silence protects, because it doesn't protect, it only delays. In the end, she didn't return to Paul's renovated room, not out of resentment, but by choice. She preferred to stay where there was love, not just space. And that woman, who once was forced to eat dog food, sat at the table with dignity again. Her story, marked by resistance and pain, began to be told by herself. Not as a tragedy, but as truth. And that truth became a beacon for other women, for other daughters, for other sons, Because those who mistreat the invisible reveal all that they are, and all they will never be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.